So welcome to Do Good Lives Have to Cross the Earth, exploring the power of community. Welcome to all those again joining us live, and welcome those watching on the recording. We've got, like I've said, a really exciting evening of presentations planned for you guys. I'm Flo from the Network of Wellbeing, which is a co-host of the event this evening. The Network of Wellbeing is all about supporting people's well-being in a way that is kind of connected to communities, to society, and to the wider planet. So this whole series that we're running, Do Good Lives Have to Cross the Earth, we're really excited about exploring that relationship between how our personal well-being is related to these wider issues. We're really pleased to be working together with Eden Project Communities. So I'm going to hand over briefly to our co-host for this evening, Tracy Robbins, who's going to tell a bit about Eden Project Communities.
Good evening. There's a few of us from Eden Project Communities. We're the UK outreach programme for Eden Project in Cornwall. And our job is about connecting people to each other and the place where they live, in the hopes that we will be more sustainable, resilient, and see a lot more social action from there. So that's who we are.
Thanks so much, Tracy. And also this evening, for this evening's event only, we're actually featuring as part of the Leeds Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing. So before we hand over to introducing our panel of speakers, we're going to hear briefly from our colleague Josh Malkin, who's going to share a little bit about that festival.
Thank you, Flo, and thank you everybody for joining us and for joining in the Leeds Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing. The Leeds Festival is trying to create a cultural change, if you like, to care as opposed to conquest. And our work is based on the mother code of care, that is self-care, care for others, care for the planet. And we have a voluntary team in Leeds who've done amazing work to create the festival in Leeds. We've got events at all different levels, and we will share the website with you for those of you who want to join any of the online events. It's a mixed face-to-face and online festival this year, and we'd be delighted if any of you chose to check out the website and join in some of the sessions. I'll hand back to Flo now.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
And I see Rochelle's already kindly put the website link in the chat box there for anyone who wants to check out more about the festival going on in Leeds. And like Josh says, online as well. There's plenty of events like this that feature as part of the festival online. So now I'm going to introduce our plan for the rest of the evening. So we've got 4 speakers planned. Each of them will be giving short presentations for 10 minutes or so. And we'll split that up in the middle with a breakout room so that you can connect with other participants on the call this evening. And then we'll be having a little bit of a longer Q&A at the end with all the speakers. So would love to hear your questions. Please do, as you're listening to the speakers, if questions come to you, please do put them in the chat box, ideally with a queue at the front, just so that our team can pick them out easily. Either a queue or a question, that just helps us to spot the questions. And also, just to say before I introduce the first speaker, if you're a social media person, we have got a hashtag for this series, which is #GoodLivesEarth, and feel free to share posts about this event, this series, either during the event or afterwards. We love to stay connected with you. But so without further ado, I will introduce the first speaker of this evening, which is Nicola Round, and I'm really pleased Nicola is joining us this evening. So Nicola is Outreach Director at Adfree Cities, which is a network of grassroots groups around the UK who are working for happier, healthier cities, free from the pressures of corporate outdoor advertising. So really grateful to Nicola for kicking off our presentations this evening, and I'll hand over to you, Nicola. Oh, I can see your presentation, Nicola, but you're maybe muted because I can't hear you.
As soon as I press share screen, all the Zoom controls moved to the top and I couldn't find them. Hello, Flo, and hello, everyone. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak to you this evening. And my name's Nicola. You've probably already done 100 things today to tread more lightly on the planet. You've probably rinsed your can of soup and put it in the right recycling box. Maybe you choose a plastic-free option for your lunch. You might have used a shampoo bar, walked to work, chosen recycled toilet paper. This is, of course, all really great stuff. But while our individual actions are really important and make a difference, too much emphasis is placed on the individual responsibility of citizens to respond to the crises in planetary health and well-being that we're seeing. And I think that if individual actions like recycling or even buying an electric car, if that's all we feel we can do, it can leave us feeling less empowered, not more. As deep down we know, this isn't really going to solve the big problem, as well as not actually getting us to where we really need to be, to a world, to a life where our well-being and our environment are valued above consumerism and corporate profit. Big corporations' goal is to sell you stuff. They've been putting the onus and responsibility back on you, not because that's the truth of the matter, but because that distracts us from the real cause of the problem. So we see big brand adverts with whiter than white smiles encouraging us to buy fizzy drinks in plastic bottles, and then the same brands tell us to recycle. We're shown glamorous or light-hearted adverts for alcohol, and then we're giving the meaningless message to drink responsibly. We're even told by adverts which push gambling to addicts and vulnerable people that we're responsible for knowing when to stop. But let's be clear. Big oil companies are responsible for the climate crisis. They've known about the devastating impact of rising emissions for decades, and they've deliberately concealed it and spread misinformation. Coca-Cola is responsible for plastic pollution. Car companies pushing SUVs are responsible for our lethal air quality, which they try to distract us from by promoting cars using images of beaches and forests. It's just like tobacco companies are responsible for people dying of cancer. So look, we can all make changes in our lives and be kinder to each other on the planet. That's all brilliant, but don't let that distract us from the collective power we have to hold corporations to account and create the better world that we want to see. So let's talk more about this driving force of consumerism and unhappiness, advertising, and then we'll talk about what we can do about it. So you might be someone who feels that they don't notice advertising in public places. Maybe you actually don't see much of it if you spend most of your time in rural areas, for example. But if you spend much time in cities, you'll be exposed to big brand advertising every day, whether you like it or not. And even if you think it's not working, I'm afraid it is. Research shows we don't even need to be paying attention to advertising for it to be influencing us. And in the case of advertising in public places, we can't avoid seeing it, even if we want to. So who are we? Adfree Cities. We're a network of groups around the UK. We're working to create happier cities free from corporate outdoor advertising. We're concerned about the impact of advertising on our well-being. So if you think about what kind of stuff you see on billboards, it's fast fashion, unhealthy food, expensive holidays, sold in ways which make us feel inadequate about ourselves, telling us that consuming will make us happier, which it might in the short term, but ultimately we're left, frankly, feeling emptier than before. Research shows that even materialism itself, holding materialistic values, makes us unhappy. And this is what advertising is trying to promote. And the work of organisations like the Common Cause Foundation, for example, show us that the promotion of extrinsic values like status and power, which is again is what advertising tries to promote, makes us less caring of each other and the planet. We're also concerned about the impacts of large-scale outdoor advertising on local economies. This kind of advertising undermines the message to shop locally and sustainably, about the impact of this sort of advertising on our environment. So huge digital screens that we see in cities now, you have a colossal energy use, they cause light pollution, and they promote products which are driving the climate and ecological crises. So, and also there is a disproportionate impact on lower income inner city communities of this kind of advertising. So these huge spaces in our cities are reserved for people, those corporations with the most money to push messages of consumption by making us feel bad about ourselves. So what I want to show you though is that communities can make a difference to this, and that by taking action to prevent or remove corporate advertising in public places, we can take a really positive step towards creating the world that we want to see together. So I'm just going to tell you about some of the things that we do and that you can get involved with as well. So our groups around the UK fight planning applications for new advertising sites. So these planning applications are all now for digital advertising screens. They're brighter, more intrusive, more unavoidable than before, capable of showing you 6 ads per minute, all designed to capture more of your attention and send you stuff. But over the past 4 years, our groups in cities like Bristol, Birmingham, South London and Leeds, we've successfully worked with local residents to prevent dozens of digital advertising screens. And Bristol in particular, where over 30 screens have been rejected at the planning stage, would look really different without these wins. You know, people in Bristol and Leeds all over the country, they can wake up one day, find their view taken up by a huge advertising screen like this happened in Leeds recently. And the planning system can be difficult to engage with. But when we know how, and we can support people to make their voices heard, we can show councils that this is important. That advertising has a real impact on people's lives and that we want our cities to prioritise well-being and community, not corporate profit. So this is what our group in Bristol, iBlock Bristol, is doing with a new campaign to try and remove 2 enormous digital screens in Bristol. So we knew, this is our petition at the moment, we knew that these screens were unpopular, and we invited people to submit testimonials describing how they're impacted. The responses we got back, frankly, were kind of heartbreaking, actually, and they revealed even deeper damage than we had expected. So we're asking the council to take action and remove them, and we have a lot of support already. And where billboards have been removed, people have realised how much better the local environment is without them. This is an example from, again in Bristol, St Werburgh's, where the local community campaigned for years to have these 3 billboards removed. They were successful, they did it, and you can see that it's revealed this beautiful Grade 2 listed church, outside of which the community's now been able to plant trees and bushes. And there are fantastic examples from cities around the world. So Sao Paulo, a huge city in Brazil, removed all their billboards in 2017. And Grenoble in France was the first European city to get rid of all their billboards in 2015. And they replaced them with trees and with community notice boards. So they're fantastic, inspiring examples that we can draw from here and that we're using to inspire our work. What else do? We replaced billboards with community art. Here's an example, again from Bristol, and this was an artwork produced by a local artist after the toppling of the Colston statue last year, to celebrate the coming together of people and taking that amazing action. Here are a couple more examples of artwork that we've put up where corporate advertising used to be. This is the Community Arts Board in Bristol. And this one was done in collaboration between the artist and the local community, asking the local community what is it that they wanted to celebrate about where they live. So you can see that, the difference between that being an advert which is selling you fast food, fashion, fast cars, to something which the community is involved in to celebrate what they love about where they live is just so different. What else have we done? This is North Street Green in Bristol. We're currently working with both the community and local traders and the landowner to campaign for the removal of these 2 billboards here, which are taking up space around this green space in the heart of this community in Bristol, which is local to where I live. And what we're doing is we're engaging the local community, asking them what they want to see instead, so that we can then create a proposal that we then take to the landowner, so that we can all work together to transform this space into a space which is working for the benefit of local communities, not for corporate profit, for corporate brands which have no benefit to our local community. Here's an activity that we do, which is a really great way of transforming advertising space. So we take a space that's reserved for corporate advertising and we transform it for a day into a collaborative space where people can express how they are and what's important to them. It just completely transforms the space into, rather than people kind of passively consuming the advertising that's there, to being able to contribute and have a conversation. And in fact, this weekend, to just gone, we did an action in this space and in 2 other locations around Bristol, where we were asking people to share their ideas on what they share their wishes for what they want for a greener city, which was great. And as you can see, children and families get involved.
1 minute to go, Nicola.
Thanks, Flo. So Yeah, wrapping up, I suppose, our groups have also had some success in pushing policy change at a local level, which is what all of these conversations help us to achieve as well. Bristol passed a policy earlier this year to restrict harmful advertising, and it looks like the same thing is happening in Norwich, in Liverpool, in North Somerset. But we're just getting started, and we want to do so much more to support communities to reimagine their local environment, to replace corporate advertising with really whatever it is that those communities want to see instead. Is it just ad-free space? Is it space to think, space to, you know, experience their local environment? Is it art? Is it growing projects? Is it murals? You know, there's so many opportunities out there to use this space for community benefit. So I guess my invitation to you is to get involved, to get in touch with us, send us your ideas, start a group in your area. We're here to support you to do that. Before I go, just want to mention 2 events that are coming up. I know that we've got some people from Leeds as part of the festival, and our group in Leeds, I've got Leeds, who actually launched a year or so ago, are just managing to put on a launch event now that we're out of lockdown. So they're holding that event on the 30th of November in Leeds, and we can send more information out to everybody afterwards. And then finally, an event that we're running at Adfree Cities next week, Behind the Greenwash, which is looking at the role of advertising in driving environmental damage and human rights violations, and hearing from these great inspiring campaigners on what they're doing to fight back. So thank you very much for listening. Do get in touch, and I'll just leave you with my contact details.
Thanks so much, Nicola. That's wonderful. And just to let everyone know that those details, the contact details and the events that Nicola mentioned will be included in the follow-up email after this event. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Really inspiring to see the much needed work that you're doing, and also the power of community in kind of challenging that narrative that's trying to be sold through the kind of corporate churn of mass advertising and creating new narratives and new spaces to imagine. So thank you, Nicola, wonderful. And I see some questions have been coming in, which we will circle back to after we've heard from our other speakers. And please do keep sharing your questions and your comments in the chat. It's really much appreciated. And for now, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Chris Hellawell. So Chris founded the Edinburgh Tool Library in 2015 and works as the director of this charity. He's got an educational background in environmental science and ecology and 15 years working in the third sector. And he's really a passionate advocate of sharing libraries, volunteerism and environmental action. So really looking forward to hearing about how you see this topic of exploring the power of community. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much. Super. I'm just going to assume that everybody can see that and shout out if you're having any problems. But yeah, just a quick intro. So I'm Chris. We've been running started the Edinburgh Tool Library in 2015. A tool library. You know, the sort of I guess the thing that we're all about. Sorry, I'm struggling to move my. There we go. It's about community, and it's about it works in exactly the same way as a regular library would work. So everything you know about libraries, you all know how they work. But we have tools instead of books, and a few other things, odds and sods, bubble machines, things like that. But we have DIY tools. We've got machine repair. We've got gardening equipment, and we also have 2 fully kitted out wood workshops in 2 different communities in the city, and they're sort of all about skill sharing and learning from each other. We run classes, we run open sessions for all our members. We have about 1,000 members, and we also work in conjunction and in partnership with lots of other charities and community groups around the city. These are just some of the projects that we've done. We build little free libraries, we do up benches for community groups, we do volunteer build program, all sorts of stuff. And you know, just to sort of I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this diagram, but we really sort of lean into the circular economy butterfly diagram. If you want to find out more, there's a lot on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And essentially the main thing to take from this is that little loop in the next to collection, which says share. And and the emphasis of this aspect of it is that by sharing, you are reducing the need to produce something, to manufacture something, and all the associated carbon footprints that come with that. Because obviously, in the case of tools, in many occasions, they're used very infrequently, and that ownership of that tool is actually quite unnecessary for most of us, not for all of us, but for most of us. So, for example, every cordless drill that's manufactured creates about 28 kilograms of carbon in its life, but only 2% of that carbon is associated with its usage. So what we're about is upping that usage, but obviously reducing the number that are produced. So by sharing those drills or anything in our inventory, we're reducing the need to make more. So we're all about access over excess is the kind of little buzzwords we try to throw out there. ETL is about saying that we have enough as a community, so that the resources that we need are already present in our community, and it's about getting those resources into the hands of the community. So it's about efficiency, and it's about unlocking the potential of things, which thus sort of enables the potential that we all have in ourselves. But it's also about the people, and it's about stories, and I'll touch on that in a wee minute as well. The sort of, I guess, the name of this evening, Do Good Lives Have to Cost the Earth? ETL passionately, and I would shout this, but my son's just gone to bed, so I will raise my voice slightly. We passionately say no. So since we opened in 2015, we have lent over 26,000 tools, which has resulted in 160 tons of carbon that has not been produced. So we're not reclaiming it, or we're not. It's not the equivalent. It's not being produced because those tools have not needed to be manufactured. The result of all that sharing has also meant that our membership has saved over £1.3 million compared to what buying would have cost them. So if they'd gone and bought those tools, it would have cost them £1.3 million collectively. It's also about engaging with the disengaged. You know, that I'm sure a lot of people are coming from an environmental background here, but I don't know if others have experienced this, but environmental projects can come across sometimes as a little bit soapboxy or a little bit preachy, and that can put a lot of people off, or you know, sort of disenfranchise different people. Because sharing equally saves money, and as well as reducing the environmental impact, it results in environmentally beneficial behaviours without the need for that to be the aim of the borrower. So I am sure we have 1,000 members. I'm sure some of those people don't believe that climate change is a thing, but they are still doing things by being member and by sharing, and it might be motivated by financial need, but they are still doing behaviours that are reducing their carbon footprint. And I think that's a really important point to sort of emphasise. Just on a sort of anecdotally, I think our membership is probably split around down the middle. So about half of our members are motivated by a passion for living sustainably, and about half of them it's for saving money for economic reasons. So around 35% of our members are in receipt of benefits. And for them, there isn't the option of, oh, well, I'll get a tradesperson to come and do that for me, or I'll go and buy those tools. They're, you know, DIY, doing it themselves, is the only way to fix the leaky tap or to tame the overgrown garden. But when people do it and they see the fruits of that labour, you know, they sort of encounter those fruits of that labour every day, and they get this kind of payback in terms of the feeling of self-worth that they get and how they see themselves. Now, we're talking about sort of recommendations. I'm slowly working my way through an excellent book, but it's a lot of thinking, so I'm very slowly working my way through it, called Shop Class as Soulcraft. And in it, the writer is a guy called Matthew Crawford, argues that making or fixing is a really powerful form of self-care, because the thing that you make or you fix then becomes a reminder that you are tangibly better at something than you were before you knew how to do that. So you don't have to learn how to see yourself in a better light. There's actually a physical embodiment of why you should see yourself in that better light. So yeah, if anyone gets a chance, it's a bit of a mission to hunt it down, but if you can get a hold of a copy, it's a really interesting book. This are some deliberately uninspiring pictures, because I think the story is where the inspiration comes from for me. The top corner picture, there's a pile of wallpaper steamers and rollers, and they were borrowed by a member for whom this whole thing was quite a cathartic experience. She had recently left the support centre for victims of domestic violence, and she came along and joined the tool library, and was, for the first time, she's a middle-aged woman, for the first time in her life, she was moving into a house that she was in there on her own. And she was able to paint that flat using paint that we donated to her, as well as using all this equipment that we gave to her to borrow, and as well as obviously that being a nicer place to live. The bottom right picture is the after shot, but as well as that being a nicer place to live, it became a constant reminder of what she could achieve on her own, and a big 2 fingers to her abuser, which I think, as I say, it's not so much the destination, but sometimes the journey that's the really important thing. When we have our interactions with our members. In terms of the next steps for us, a slightly random choice of pictures here. As far as I'm concerned, the A-Team is the original upcycling TV program. But we're sort of following on from Nicola. We want to get sharing into the mainstream, so we want. I'd be interested to chat about advertising for good potentially, but I think it's a constant sort of source of sadness for me that we bang on to our kids about the importance of sharing, but once they get to adulthood, it's about the accumulating wealth and accumulating stuff. And we want to make reuse and sharing mainstream, and so that it's the first port of call when somebody needs to use something, and it doesn't need to sort of own it. So it should be as easy as shopping, hopefully easier. And you should all be able to go, everybody here should be able to go into your local sharing library and borrow things that you only occasionally need. I guess the reason I sort of went for these pictures was, wouldn't it be great if the examples of reuse that are in the mainstream were set in the real world, and they were set before an apocalypse rather than after it. That would be something I would love to see. And finally, just a wee bit of sort of up-to-date news and hope for the future from north of the border. Scotland's Climate Assembly this year, I think there's a link going into the chat, but the Climate Assembly was a consultation with 100 sort of randomly assorted people across Scotland, who were it was a bit like jury service, basically, worked with scientists on climate science, and had lots of ideas thrown at them, and they selected what they thought would be the best ways of tackling climate change to achieve Scotland's targets. And one of the very strong recommendations that they came up with was that every community in Scotland should have access to a sharing library. In December, the Scottish Government have to publish their response to the Climate Assembly, and I am very hopeful that there will be a sort of watershed moment for sharing libraries in Scotland, and obviously hopefully that trickles down elsewhere as well, and disseminates across the UK and Europe and the world. But I think the important thing to say is let's not wait till the apocalypse before we start making the most of the resources that we already have available. Let's start doing it now and get those behaviours sort of ingrained in our communities. But that's all from me. Thank you very much. I shall stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Chris. Wonderful presentation, really inspiring to hear about, and I see it's really resonating with people in the chat wanting libraries of things all over the place. And just to say that the Network of Wellbeing, this is particularly close to our hearts because we also started a library of things down in Devon. My colleague Morella has put the details in the chat box as well. And yeah, it's something that we see as really important to well-being, to kind of change the way we consume, connect with our communities more, and kind of reframe our consumption habits as a part of that. And yeah, both Nicola and Chris's presentations have touched on really interesting and inspiring ways to do that. So what we're going to do now is go very briefly, just for a few minutes, into breakout rooms. We're going to do it a little bit differently today for those of you that have come to our events before. We're just going to be in pairs just for a couple of minutes, just to meet someone else on the event this evening, and to check in with them and introduce yourselves and hear any reflections on the talk so far. And then we welcome you back in a couple of minutes to hear from the final two presenters this evening, which are also going to be equally as inspiring as Chris and Nicola have been. So see you back here in a few minutes. Just checking in with Tracy if you're ready to put people in the breakout room.
There might be a few threes, but most of them will be twos. So
Wonderful.
Speed talking.
Yeah.
Off you go.
So welcome back from the breakout rooms. Hopefully you got a chance to, albeit briefly, connect with someone else on the meeting. Mm-hmm. And yeah, we love to give that chance for people to connect, and sometimes yeah, it's always a bit of an experiment as to how long and with how many people. So I hope that you managed to have a bit of a connection with others if you were looking for that. And we're now going to hand over to the third speaker of the evening, and that is Judy, Ling, Wong, who's CBE. So Judy is a poet, painter and environmentalist, best known as the honorary president of the Black Environment Network for pioneering multicultural environmental participation. So yeah, really excited to hear Judy's perspective on on community building and in relation to this broader question of the series, Do Good Lives Have to Cost the Earth? So over to you, Judy.
So good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you all about seeing multicultural environmental heritage and culture as a rich context for well-being. Early on in the history of Black Environment Network, we worked with a group of Bangladeshi women that wished to find somewhere to grow vegetables. The final project evaluation question was, what was the best thing about this project? The typical answers would have been good fresh food, better health, meeting new people, or simply the pleasure of being outdoors. However, the answer of this group blew us away. They said the best thing about this project is that our bare feet are once more upon the soil, our mother. It demonstrated a visceral connection, emotional, physical, and spiritual, all at the same time. A connection that is about a deep human need with all the dimensions of what it means to be alive on this planet. Such highly connected people will never do anything to harm the planet. They honor it with their very existence. Diverse cultural visions of nature and people, ways of seeing and being, inspire the realization of well-being bound to nature by identifying with it as one. Let's have a look at some traditions. When I was a young person wandering around southern India, early in the morning I saw village women come out of their houses and draw a rhythmic pattern with rice powder on the ground in front of their homes. To my astonishment, when they finished, they just took a broom and swept the beautiful creation away. I mean, they didn't take a photo, stand admiring it, or think about the word they had put into it. I was told it is an act of devotion and a prayer for invoking the blessing of their homes. This demonstrates a completely unmaterialistic way of being, linked to the values of beauty and connection with nature. Tomorrow and every day, they will do something else equally beautiful but different. In Mexico City, by the cathedral, I saw traditional dancers. I asked them why they were dancing there, and they said, well, you know, the cathedrals are built on top of our sacred places. So when we dance here, we are dancing on our sacred land. Once, at the end of a conference in England, a Morris dancer came up to me and said, yes, the same thing happened here and across all of Europe. Churches were built on sacred pagan sites. Perhaps we too should be dancing right next to our churches. And Mother Earth is another concept. A Waicho tribal person told me, you talk only about Mother Earth, we talk about Father Sky. We talk about Grandmother Moon and Brother Deer. When you talk about taking care of the environment, we think of it as taking care of our family. Here is a building of bamboo in Bali without windows, as they do not need them in that climate. And this wonderful building, when you walk through it, it shifts and moves under your feet. The Sikh community marked the 300th anniversary of the birth of Khalsa, their scriptures, with the planting of 300 trees in Bestwood Country Park in Nottingham. They created a native woodland for everyone. The colour and excitement of that celebration is in the past. When you go there now, there's nothing but beautiful trees with a tiny bilingual sign saying Khalsa Wood. But for the community, when they go there, it echoes with meaning. Look at those tiny plants clinging to the cliff out of crevices in wild weather in China. Stunted but perfect mimics of mature trees. They are the original inspiration for bonsai plants, your own little bit of wildness, symbolizing the heroic character of human nature, adapted to the conditions of wildness. And indoor plants, if you research where they come from, you'll find that they connect us to the great forests of the world, because they are from the forest floor where there's very little light, enabling them to survive indoors here. And we can connect to different cultures through the arts, where poems encourage us not to think about, but to absorb cultural meaning. Here is my very Zen poem. Today, I went swallowing skies to feed my being. The seagull cried wild against the sliding of the tide. Why, of all nature, do you choose to swallow emptiness? Among our ethnic communities in the UK and Indigenous peoples across the world, there's an aliveness of heritage and culture that's intrinsic to the natural world. We know we are part of it. However, the transformation is not alien to any of us. We have all traveled the same route. Originally, we were all completely bound to nature, not just for survival. We thrived on the richness of relationship, in which lies the truth that the so-called economic developed world is beginning to grasp again. It is the truth of our complete interdependence and interconnectedness. Nature and people are one. You know, if we look into the deep heart of the climate emergency, you see that it is a failure of two fundamental relationships: the relationship of people to nature and the relationship of people to each other. If we love nature deeply enough, we cannot damage the climate in the way we have. And if we love people deeply enough, we cannot damage them. In rediscovering interconnectedness, we find it familiar, accessible, and beautiful. If we immerse ourselves in nature, we recognize that nature is unnecessarily beautiful. If you were to design flowers with 100 or maybe let's say 1,000 different flowers not do the job? But no, nature presents us with millions of variations, with colors and tones, sizes and forms, sometimes of a strangeness and mystery beyond our imagination. We are born out of nature, and we are of that ilk. We want more. We want to claim our full humanity in order to possess our full well-being. Encounter with multicultural dimensions gives us a hint of our journey of the retrieval of richness and its development to be a suitable 21st century portfolio of actions. As humans, we need to be inspired and motivated, not just mechanically practical in our solutions. This is our urbanizing world, with our deprived populations living in places like this. Solutions to greening our cities in order to create sustainable green cities, rich with culture, must be a top item on our agenda. At the critical time, we're instinctively reaching for change. Frameworks of change are being put into place. The UN Habitat initiated the first Global Stakeholders Forum in 2019, placing importance on diverse voices. In 2017, at a high-level meeting, it linked environment with human settlements through the New Urban Agenda. The UN Secretary-General asserted that the battle for sustainability will be fought, won or lost in our cities. We must infuse our actions with beauty and meaning. We're working in the UK towards rewilding. We're discussing the preservation of indigenous lands and using traditional knowledge and wisdom. The trick of it is that we must resist bleakly intellectually figuring things out. Let us be alive with our senses, touching mystery, even as we are writing a policy, a strategy, and all that. Letting that connection fuel a rich, passionate, and determined action to fulfill our integrated needs. To end this talk, let's take something from the ageless wisdom cosmology of the East. In the West, love is highly romanticized. Within the ageless wisdom, there's a term called love wisdom that sees love as something leading us to a sharp, strategic way of acting, motivated by the love for people. Within that way of seeing, policy is the expression of love wisdom, and its outcome is beauty. The beauty of people and nature thriving together. In other words, a sumptuous way of well-being. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Judy. Really wonderful and inspiring. Yeah, such a rich presentation in terms of bringing kind of inclusiveness and diversity into our communities, and also changing our relationships with each other and with nature. Really, really beautifully expressed. So thank you. And thank you. Feel free to keep adding questions and comments and reflections into the chat box. We're going to hand over to our final presenter for the evening, Fiona, and then we're going to have a Q&A with our panel of speakers. But last but not least, I'd like to introduce Fiona Deer, who has been coordinating community campaigns at the Climate Coalition for over a decade and led on the recent Great Big Green Week, which some of you may have been involved in or heard about. Was a wonderful campaign. And she also loves scavenging and upcycling furniture. So I hope that you've enjoyed the other presentations as well this evening, Fiona, and over to you. We just so you know, we can't hear you yet, Fiona, so I'm not sure if you're on mute.
Great. Hello. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been brilliant listening to the other speakers too, and definitely want to set up a tool library in my area, or a library of things or something. But I'm here to talk about the Great Big Green Week, which I had the pleasure of leading on for the Climate Coalition. This was the first year we did it. So I'll talk to you a little bit about how that worked and how it linked with wellbeing. So just the context is, I'm sure all or most of you will know that this year is important for climate change because the UK is hosting COP26, which is the UN Climate Summit. And the Climate Summit happens every year, but it's never been hosted by the UK. And this is probably one of the biggest international summits that the UK has ever hosted. So it's a really big deal. And the government cares how it's seen by the public and by the rest of the world this year in particular. So we really needed to show a big public show of support. We know that people are much more concerned about climate change now than they have been before. And we really wanted to have a kind of a big bang, a real focal point. So our challenge was that the obvious way of doing that is to do a protest, which is what we've done in the past. But we know that from audience research that, people come from different backgrounds, have different values, and there's a very small number of people that would ever go on a protest. There's a lot of people that would be sympathetic, but they wouldn't necessarily go. And what we wanted to do is really reflect the full breadth of everybody in the UK that cares about this. So where we got to in the end was with the core elements of the Great Big Green Week. And I think for me, the most important part of it was that it was totally open. All we asked people to do was do something during that week. And what they did was totally up to them, and it could link with what they were doing. So we had football. We had football clubs getting involved and using that week to encourage their fans to travel there by foot or by bike. There were lots of litter picks. So kind of friends of the local parks organising that. We had some kind of panel speakers, we had MP meetings, which is what you might expect more of, but there was also theatre and art. Murals went up across the country, they're beautiful. And it really, we were just blown away by everyone's creativity, because it was exactly what we'd hoped, in that the variety was a reflection of UK society, really. So totally open. The other thing that we added was that we normally ask people to just organise one event or something, and we chatted to some brilliant organisers from Sustainable St Albans and Winchester Action on Climate Change, who have been organising climate festivals for a few years now, and that was one of our core asks, and we weren't sure how it would go down because that's quite a big ask, but people really went for it, and the idea of getting people to act as hubs, and the ask wasn't actually for these people go and organise an event, it was get other people to organise an event. So it really tapped into local networks and also broadened those networks, because it was an excuse for people to get in touch with new partners. So they were the real core elements that I think made it work. But what we've heard since, also from our members who are also local groups, and even those ones that organise it a few years, have been organising it for a few years, they really enjoyed it being part of a bigger thing, and they really liked the overarching sense of purpose. So in terms of what happened, we were blown away by the number of events. There were 5,000, and this was in the first year. This is the only time we've done it. And we really got an impression that it was snowballing from kind of early to midsummer. We were kind of like, wow, yeah, this has tapped into something, like people want this. And it was just from then on, it was really exciting. And we wondered if we could get maybe 30 local festivals. And then we increased that a little bit when we got a bit more funding from the National Lottery. But there were 200 in the end. And some of them might have been like in my local area, which was Enfield Climate Festival. They had 100, and my little play street was the 100th event, was almost the best bit of the week for me. But also there were some where it might just be kind of one event, but with stalls from loads of partners. But essentially a festival was kind of bringing lots of partners together, which is what we really wanted to do, so that we could make the most of. Sorry, I've got a little visitor.
I can tell. Good evening.
He's I thought I might be safe talking now because he'd be in bed, but
oh no, he definitely wants you.
definitely watching. I'll just crack on. Anyway, so that was really exciting, that the kind of the diversity and the scale. And so just to kind of pull on some of the events and how this linked in with the idea of good lives. So what we found is there were lots of nature themed events. So this gorgeous montage was put together by a WI group where they kind of went on nature walks and they literally hugged trees. But WI's groups aren't necessarily the groups that you expect to hug trees. So so it was great. And then, you know, we had, then down here is Dr. Amir Khan, who presents on Good Morning Britain, and he got involved and did some seed planting in a GP surgery in Bradford, which is in a really deprived area. So it really helps them. There was a really nice link, the crossover with health. And then over here on this beautiful beach was an activity in Wales where they were seaweed foraging, which I'm just very jealous of because it looks gorgeous. So that was getting out in nature, which we know is good for people. Repair came up a lot, and actually there was probably more of it around fashion, and so there was kind of a sustainable t-shirt fashion show. Where was that? I can't remember exactly. It was up north. So that was they did that. There were kind of repair cafes. There was also some electrical repair featured and other things like that. So we were really keen, and as we heard earlier on, repair is really important. It's the improvement in your kind of self-esteem, but also just the doing things with your hands, the kind of meditative element of repair. Exercise is obviously really important. Cycling was a really big part of this, and my personal experience on the last day of the Great Big Green Week, I went on a local bike ride, and I was expecting, to be honest, a load of middle-aged men in lycra, to be honest, but it was great. They'd really brought in a load of local groups. So there was a women's cycling group, and they go around mosques and encourage women to cycle, because they know that kind of there aren't so many Muslim women that are cyclists. So they were there and part of it. There was the first Turkish cycling club in London, and we stopped by them and they gave us lunch, and it was this beautiful, like, multicultural, serene, it was so calm cycling around, and that was just exactly what I needed after a very frantic week. But I'm sure everyone else enjoyed it loads too. But really what really kind of happened for everyone, I think, it was about getting communities together, and that's so important for people to feel connected to their community, and we were just delighted to provide a way, an excuse for people to do that. So just in terms of some of what we found since the week, and we've looked at our results and surveys and things like that, is that that doing things like this in the open way that I said, that I mentioned, and in using the networks, did really brought in new people. So 45 of the organisers had not previously organised a climate event. Like, we were blown away by that. We were expecting that to be much lower. And then 40% of participants had not previously taken part in something. So by broadening it out, it just brought more people in, helped people meet each other. 88% of organisers, they now feel more connected to others in their community, and of course they would, because they were working together. And 94% of them plan to continue working together. And again, that's because it was a really hard ask. It was a hard thing to do, and people were knackered from it, but they want to carry on working together. And amazingly, a lot of them also want to do it again. So we haven't put them off by asking them to do too much. So I'm going to end there, and I will stop sharing my screen.
I was still on mute. Thank you so much, Fiona. That's really inspiring to hear. To hear about how the Great Big Green Week developed, and I know that it's a real lesson learned in terms of the open remit you gave to people and organisations to do what they wanted to do with the week, and how that really increased engagement. So I feel like there's a lot to learn about the power of community in the way that developed. So thank you so much to all of our panel of speakers. It's been so wonderful to hear all of your insights shared, and thank you to everyone listening, for contributing in the chat box and sharing all your questions. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Tracy, who's going to share some of your questions now with the speakers as part of the Q&A. Over to you.
There are so many questions. You're all very active, keen bunch. So I'll take a couple from each, and then if we've still got time, I might go back. So start with Nicola. Back on form now, Nicola. So quite a few questions. So a complicated one even for me to read, so I'm not even sure where you might start with answering. But David has asked, where does the responsibility for consumption between the individual and the organisation begin and end? And can advertising actually play any type of positive role in society? Two questions in one.
Yeah, thank you, David, for asking that. I suppose what I'm saying is not that individual actions aren't important. I think it's really important, but I do think that far too much emphasis is weighted on individuals, and I think that when we come together, as has just been shown by fantastically by the other presenters, what a kind of difference that can make to the outcome, and just as importantly to the feeling that we have of taking that collective action. Can advertising play a positive role? So I kind of think there are several answers to this. Look, large-scale commercial advertising, which is kind of what we're talking about as the problem, is it exists to make you buy something, and it's usually, in the case of this large-scale advertising, it's something that you don't really need. So I think that there are some advertising companies will also go out of their way to show you the very few examples that they've got of giving space over to local organisations and charities, and they won't go on about the space that they give to car companies and fossil fuel companies. And I would say that those examples are unfortunately the exception, really. Like if our cities were covered in advertising for charities and local businesses, Adfree cities wouldn't exist. I don't think. Like, that's not really the problem. However, I would say in theory, yes, advertising can play a positive role. And I think there are some interesting examples actually that we've seen recently from the advertising industry itself. Because of course this industry is full of fantastic creative people who unfortunately have decided to spend their time making profits for big corporations who aren't doing us any good. However, there are great people there, and there are some industry-led initiatives. They're called things like the Conscious Advertising Network and the Purpose Disruptors, who are working to kind of encourage people within the industry to sort of use their powers for good, to say no to some of these like less, some of these kind of immoral advertising contracts that they get given. So I would say, yeah, there are signs there, but ultimately I would say that we'd be better off without it in our public places, to be honest.
Thank you. That was a tough question, I thought. Carly has asked, have you also been targeting ads on public transport, buses and trains? And have you had any success with that? Or is it mainly billboards?
Yeah, so we focused on billboards and bus stop adverts particularly. I would say the short answer to that is really that we're new and we're small and we need to focus somewhere. And our concern, our focus has been on that. I don't think that those things aren't important, but they do tend to be controlled by other authorities and other contracts. And having said that, there's an example in London, which is sort of organised slightly differently, but the mayor was able to influence a ban on junk food advertising on the London Transport Network, which is still in place and has been effective and has gone well. So those things can happen. It would mean engaging with different organisations like the authorities who govern transport. But yeah, I think absolutely it'd be great to be doing that on buses as well.
Yeah. Although there's about another 4 questions, we'll move on so that other people get a chance and you can have a drink and relax a bit. So Chris is now in the hot seat. Whenever I present, I hate the questions bit. I'm like, oh, questions, I don't know. Have to think of my feet. So a really quick one from Fiona is, do you get funding for the Edinburgh Tool Library, or does it pay for itself?
It's a mixture. So we obviously with a membership, we have membership fees. So we are I think probably the biggest one in the UK. So we're well developed in terms of our membership. So we do get quite a large proportion of that, but we also have a business model that's it's quite modular. So the workshop side of things that we have, we get a lot of grant funding to work with particular disadvantaged groups that we spend a lot of time in partnership with. So that it's a bit of a funny one in terms of the business model. There is if it's a library that people want to set up, there is a model in there that is sustainable in terms of rent and maintenance costs and things like that. Stuff starts to get expensive, so I think the large scale realistic model is to look at it as a community volunteer led organization. Certainly our library is led by our library service is led by volunteers. We've got about 40 volunteers, and 9 times out of 10 the staff just come in to cover if somebody's off sick last minute. But yeah, it's a explaining business models and the nitty gritty of it. I could give me another hour and a half, and I'll.
Well, you don't have it, so
I'll scratch
you're
the
not
surface.
allowed.
Okay, I'll shut
and
up.
I think you've sort of answered the next question, which came from Kristin and Ronnie, which is the subscription model like a car club? So I guess there's a membership fee. Is that means tested or leveled, or is it just?
It is 30 quid for it's 10 quid if you in receipt of benefits for a year. So we have an annual membership, so it's £10 for a year, and if you're not receiving benefits, it's 30 quid for the year. So there's very few power tools you can buy for less than your annual membership, and you can borrow as many times as you want, as many things as you want, and you also get 12 hours a week access to workshops. So there's nobody getting diddled in terms of if we wanted to have a financially sustainable or business model, we could run the workshop side of things, but we want to make sure it's really important that everybody can access that, and that there's nobody financially excluded.
Yeah. I can't decide between my next two ones. Oh, I know.
The easy one. That's the one you should choose.
Well, maybe the quicker one to answer. I'll come back. So there is. You can answer this later. What are the top 10 things borrowed and what's never been bothered? Very interesting. But Caroline has asked, how does your local tool hire shop feel about the tool library?
So tool hire shops generally are hiring to industry, so we don't really scratch the surface. If you were to borrow a drill from Speedy Hire or one of the commercial things, you would be paying 3 or 4 years membership to borrow a drill for a weekend. So they're renting on an industrial scale, and they're also all of our tools, or 99% of our tools, are donated by members of the public or by organizations. So we're not really competing for the same thing. B&Q or people who are trying to persuade you to buy things that you maybe don't need might be more upset with us. However, I think the other way to look at it is if somebody borrows something from us and they realize that actually they need this in their life, and it's actually a hobby or it's something that they want to go on professionally, then there are places out there that they can go and get them from.
Excellent. Well, I won't ask for the top 10, but what are the main things borrowed and what never has been borrowed? It's an interesting question.
Drills. We've got one drill that's been out. Something like 167 different people have borrowed it, and that's for a week at a time. So that's 3 or 4 years of constantly doing work instead of 13 minutes, which is your average. And there's loads of stuff that hasn't been out, but it's mostly things like spanners and screwdrivers and little things because people have got them at home. Okay. But it would be a bit weird if you couldn't get a screwdriver off us, so we do have them.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Thank you. There are more questions, but I'll move on to Judy. So this question is from Lynette, and she asks, how can we encourage people to embrace nature and bypass the sterile landscapes in urban areas? Lynette thinks that it feels simple to incorporate green spaces in our urban area if we were all to tend the garden. Are you there, Judy?
Yes, here I am.
Yes.
There are
So,
actually areas where ordinary people have done a lot to completely transform their neighborhoods. I live in a quite deprived part of London, but when I go off the A3 with a zooming traffic into a residential area, very old houses and so on, I actually have seen an area where people have, as a neighborhood, allowed their front garden plants to spill onto the pavement. They put huge pots and things like cheap rubbish bins in which they plant trees and huge bushes. They've also lifted up paving stones and planted bushes and extra trees and so on. And the whole area looks like a jungle. Literally, and it is a borough of London where the local authority is very flexible. As long as you can get a wheelchair and a buggy through, they have no problems. So you can actually possess the pavement. I've also seen boroughs with imagination who, you know, if you walk along the pavement, you never walk zigzag and walk between the bits between trees, do you? So there's a whole strip between each tree of pavement they never walk on. And some boroughs have begun to take the paving stones off that and begun to plant in them. So imaginative ways of creating new areas can be transformed into green areas, growing climates, up buildings and so on. All these things can actually transform very bleak areas into very lush areas that's full of wildlife. And I've seen that happening in particular neighborhoods. And I think that all residential areas should actually be planted up like that, reclaiming the streets as actual areas which can be turned into very green spaces.
That's lovely. I hope you've seen the answer to the second question. I'm not convinced. But this is from Roger. Many of the big environmental NGOs have reputations to be dominated by white middle-class men in suits. Have you seen any signs of this changing? And how are we addressing this? How can it be changed?
Are you talking about organizations in general?
Environmental organizations, big environmental NGOs.
Well, at last, because of the death of George Floyd and what Black Lives Matter has been pushing for, we now have an impetus, not just in the UK, but right across the world around diversity, equality and inclusion. And one of the things that Black Lives Matter say so astutely is that everything is structural. So one of the big things that organizations are now struggling to do, and it is difficult because you can't just snap your fingers and get multicultural people to suddenly appear on your boards. But what we really do need is that transformation whereby we actually see representation on decision-making structures within organizations. And when that is in place, then things will really happen.
Fabulous, thank you. And again, more questions, but I'm going to quickly move over to Fiona. So a really quick one, is it going to happen again next year?
Yeah, I want to say yes. We've got a board meeting tomorrow where
yes,
everyone's just assuming it's happening. Everyone wants it to happen, so it will.
And will there be any more events or campaigns like that next year?
Yes.
Is it going to be quarterly, monthly?
Goodness, quarterly would be amazing, but we might all collapse. So,
that's my next question.
We're working towards doing it September. We might actually think about for the one after that, if actually maybe there's a better time like May or June, because then you get schools and you don't lose the summer holidays and all that stuff. But anyway, that's a longer term plan. We've got a campaign in in February and March, which is a bit about kind of we're encouraging groups to come together again and kind of start planning again for Great Big Green Week in September, but also to kind of use that as a way of like sending a message to your MP, so kind of in a creative way, because it's around Valentine's Day and we use the green heart, do a bit of Love Actually style invites and get MPs to really engage in a creative way. So that's on on the Climate Coalition website if you want to get involved in that. But otherwise, we'll be talking very soon about Great Big Green Week.
I was just thinking on the 5th of June, which is not only Jubilee weekend, is Environment Day and the month of community. I think you should go for June. Have great fun. So the next two questions are slightly similar. So do you have any tips for people suffering exhaustion and apathy on climate campaigning? I sometimes just feel like what I do doesn't make a difference, and that this can really negatively impact my well-being. And actually someone has asked for all the speakers about how they manage burnout and find balance.
Yeah. So I would probably say that like connecting in with other groups that exist already, and if you're knackered because you're driving forward a project, it's okay to step back a bit and just join other groups, and then you can see how much is happening, and it's really encouraging. And that's what we've seen, and this has been a bit personal for me as well, seeing it, because Enfield is my borough, and I just did not realize there was so much going on, and going on that bike ride and not realizing how many people were into cycling, and that was super inspiring. And literally I was just totally frazzled at that point because it was the end of the Great Big Green Week, and that just really was just really calming. So I think kind of getting inspired from all of the other stuff that's going on and realizing how big it is, and like 5,000 events is just like a drop in the ocean compared to how much is going on every day. And then just in terms of personal burnout, in a way, like because I've been campaigning on climate change for so long, I have, in a way, it's easier to step back a bit, and I see colleagues who are new to it like getting closer to burnout. And I think again, for me, I've been campaigning on climate change for a long time, but in the last couple of years I got involved in local campaigning, probably a bit more than I could chew, and got a bit knackered from it. But again, it was that being connected to my local community and seeing it being real and part of my life, that kind of really invigorated me. So it's kind of the same answer for both questions, really.
Fabulous, thank you. And I don't really think we have time to go to the other speakers, but if we have got some other questions, we will see whether our speakers can answer them and pop them in the follow-up. Is it over to you now, Flo?
Yeah, I would say maybe we could just hear a brief closing word from all of the speakers, and if you would like to draw in any reflections on that question, because it's such an important question that draws together kind of, you know, engagement in kind of campaigning and nature and your own kind of personal well-being and story, then yeah, maybe we can just do a very brief kind of 1 minute each speaker, and then we'll move towards wrapping up. So yeah, would anyone like to come in from the remaining speakers, Judy, Nicola or Chris?
Yes, I'll come in.
Go for it.
It chimes in so much with what I was talking about, that it is a beautiful world. Although it's a stressful world, you can find beauty around you if you want to. So it's really a philosophy of self-care and self-discipline, because campaigning and doing any of this work is not a sprint, it's a marathon. It's the art of the marathon runner. So if you do not have self-discipline and self-care, you won't be able to survive. So in order to contribute, enjoy yourself.
That's a really beautiful note to close your contribution on. Thank you so much, Judy. And Chris or Nicola?
Sorry, somebody asked about tool libraries in the chat and it distracted me. I always, when I'm getting a bit frazzled, I try to do, and I think it kind of applies to any sort of job or area of work, is kind of do the thing that got you really energized in the first place. So I spend my days now in front of a computer doing Zoom call after Zoom call, and can, like a lot of us, feel pretty burnt out by it. But if I want to kind of re-energize myself, I'll go down and I'll do one of the shifts where I speak to the members, and I see people and they tell me the stories of what they've been. Friday night there was a guy who borrowed a sander because his 6-month-old puppy had been biting holes in the wall of his flat that he's trying to sell. And like little things like that, just funny little stories, and it's kind of the reason why we do that, is to help those people, and it's just connecting with that again. I find that really helpful.
Yeah, so important. Thank you, Chris. And Nicola?
Yeah, I mean, I can really connect with the question, the feeling that was shared about, often as environmental campaigners and as individuals, we can feel kind of powerless, can't we, in the face of the big challenges that we face. But I think, the theme of this event, it really speaks to that, which is about, what we can do when we come together. And I think, you know, particularly during lockdown, our groups did find it very challenging, you know, trying to sort of get grassroots engagement off the ground at a time when you can't really go and engage with people was really challenging. But I think, just as Fiona said, having that connection with each other and knowing that there were other people out there who were also kind of working for the same ultimate goal, even if it was in different ways, is really motivating. In terms of you know, in terms of burnout, I think at work, our small team, we do try and kind of create that sense of community within our team as well, right? So we check in with each other, we make sure we're supporting each other, we make sure we're celebrating successes. That's really important as well. I mean, I would definitely say don't underestimate how great it feels to stop one digital advertising screen from going up in your neighbourhood. That is fantastic, and celebrating those successes together kind of help keep us motivated. And from my personal point of view, yeah, take a break from your screens. Take a break from your screens, go and spend time with people you love, or on your own if that works for you. I'm lucky enough to have a 2-year-old who keeps me very busy. We'll take a bus, go somewhere green, go to the woods, and I'll just kind of poke around in the dirt with him for a bit, and that tends to ground me. But yeah, it's a challenge.
Nice one. Thank you, Nicola. And thank you so much to all of our speakers this evening, and to our wonderful audience as well. On that note, we're gonna close and draw a close to the evening, but we would love to invite you to stay connected with this series. So this is the second event in a series of 3 speaker events that will be followed by a kind of more interactive event to kind of help those that have attended any of these the events in the series to stay connected and explore more and share what you're doing around these types of topics. So yeah, we'll include the links to the next event, which will be on the 26th of October, in the follow-up email, and hopefully one of my colleagues can pop it in the chat as well. And yeah, we'll also, it's been mentioned in the chat a few times, we've got our own kind of library of things called the Share Shed. So if anyone's particularly interested in that, we're going to be running a kind of Ask the Share Shed event, which is basically for anyone who wants to look into setting up a library of things themselves. You can come along and ask our colleague Morella, who's been through the ins and outs of setting that up. So yeah, really welcome to join us at that event too. Yeah, and so I think those are the main things. What we love to do just to close the event is just to take a screenshot of everyone joining, just to say, so if you're able to turn your camera on and you would like to be in a screenshot, then do your photo smile now, and I will take a screenshot. Let me just get into the correctly. Wonderful, it's nice to see all your faces. Thank you for the enthusiastic wave, Chris. So yeah, that was everything. We look forward to staying in touch with you, and thanks so much for being a part of the event this evening. Feel free to unmute yourselves if you'd like to when you're saying goodbye, because it's lovely to say.
Bye-bye, thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you very much,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye now.
Take care, bye-bye.